Dan, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you on. We've been talking for so much beforehand that I had to just say, hey, we need to press the record button.
Gotta get going.
Gotta get going. You got it. Would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me on. I'm happy to be here. I'm Dan Stenziano, thru hiker. I make videos on YouTube. Love doing high routes, which we can talk about as we get into the podcast. See, you were right. As soon as we turn the camera on, I don't know.
No. It's a great intro, and I think it kind of encapsulates what you do and kind of your attitude of I've noticed your videos, you're just kind of very casually putting out this content where you're hiking major trails across the U.S., and it kind of, what I was struck by is just how casually you kind of go through it. So it looked to me like your first video, is that your first major thru hike, the PCT, back in 2017?
Yep, 17. That was the first thru hike I ever did, southbound, so 2,600 or so miles, Canada to Mexico. Those were not necessarily the first videos that I made, but pretty much. Like I told you earlier, they were just recorded like on my phone, and it wasn't even a good phone. And the videos were pretty scrappy and, just like very casual. But that's how I got my start making videos, and not only did I learn a ton doing the PCT, like actually hiking it, but I learned a ton about making and editing videos through the process of putting together all my vlogs after the trail.
That's a lot to take on, both of those aspects at the same time. Do you have a substantial background in backpacking, hiking that kind of built up to the PCT, or was this something that you just one day decided you wanted to do?
Well, I don't really have a substantial background in the outdoors. When I first sort of fell in love with the mountains was 2015. I had just finished my undergrad and wanted to just take a trip out west and see some stuff that I had never seen before. So my girlfriend and I went to North Cascades National Park in Washington and just did a week of day hiking and car camping. And I'm from the East Coast, and so I had never seen anything like that before. The only mountains I'd ever really seen, that I'd hiked in were the Adirondacks in upstate New York, which are beautiful, but nothing compared to the vastness and the grandness of the mountains out west. And the Cascades in particular are so jagged and glaciated, and just the meadows with wildflowers, just total Sound of Music views around every turn. And I just couldn't believe it. Like my mind was blown. And so that was 2015, summer of 2015. Following summer, I did the John Muir Trail, which was, I guess, like my first thru hike. And then by that point, I had caught the bug. And over that winter, I was already planning the PCT. Because on the JMT, I found out that, this trail isn't just 200 miles long. It actually spans the whole length of the country. I was like, you can do that? And once I found out about that, basically, my life was ruined and I was a thru hiker.
So now, for those who are listening, who are trying to wrap this all together, the JMT is a quote unquote smaller section. I think you said, is it 220 or 210 miles?
Yeah, like 210-ish. The John Muir Trail. So it's in the Sierra Nevada mountains of California, and it goes from Yosemite National Park all the way down to Mount Whitney. And it goes through several wilderness areas and national parks, and basically showcases the, maybe not the best of what that mountain range has to offer, because to really get the best, you have to go off trail, I think.
It's interesting.
Showcases a lot of the beauty of that range.
It's interesting that you say that, and I can't wait to talk about your high route trail. But I believe the JMT is consistently ranked among the best trail in the U.S., if not the world, correct, in that range?
Well, it's very famous. A lot of people know about it. A lot of people write blogs about it, make videos about it, and there are a lot of people on it, which has upsides and downsides. You can make friends on trail. You'll never necessarily feel super out there because you'll always like bump into somebody, but you can definitely get like hours of solitude. I'm talking like in peak season. It's definitely beautiful. Like the scenery is world class. It's very easy to see why it's become such a popular trail.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so your experience on the JMT was going so well that you were already contemplating the much longer PCT while you were on the trail?
Yeah, well, I think where was it? Red's Meadow, which is a resupply point along the JMT and PCT. I was hanging out like in the picnic area at the campground there, and there was a thru hiker who was must have been going northbound on the PCT at so it was July, so he was pretty late in the season. Or maybe he was a section hiker. I don't know. It was years ago. I don't remember. But he was talking about the Pacific Crest Trail, and that sort of planted the seed. And, then when I got home, I started researching. And but yeah, the JMT was a profound, informative experience for me. And yeah.
That's what I find is so common when I get out there, right? Is that you run across people who are you always find somebody who's doing something longer or bigger than you, and just talking to them is so inspiring. And like you said, planting the seed. And that's actually a big motivation for why I wanted to start this podcast, is that I feel like on my various adventures, I've always had the chance to talk to these people who are doing these huge trips, but never get the chance to share them. Or when I relate my trip to friends and family, they say, "Oh, this is so grand." But I was like, "Hey, we got to talk to the real people like you who are going truly big in the outdoors."
Well, it's all relative, right? Because I meet people on my trips who are doing bigger things than what I'm doing. Like I've been on trail and bumped into people who are in the process of doing their calendar year Triple Crown. And for listeners who don't know what that is, it's when you do all three of the most famous national scenic trails in the United States in one calendar year. So that's the Appalachian Trail, the Pacific Crest Trail, and the Continental Divide Trail, all in one calendar year. So that amounts to over 7,000 miles in one season, which is incredible. And personally, I just know that I don't have the mental stamina for an effort like that. I used to think that maybe I did, but I think I really satisfied whatever need that I had to do long distance backpacking just by doing the PCT and the CDT. I just don't think I could be out there for that long.
It's a long time to be out there, and I have noticed that your content has kind of switched, or moved on, or kind of evolved. But going back to that JMT experience, I guess I'm just so curious, because I find my success and my experience in the wilderness heavily depends on a lot of the gear, a lot of the setup beforehand. Did you find that when you were doing the JMT, did you have your gear pretty wired? Like, did you have any complaints along those lines?
I wouldn't say that it was super dialed on the JMT. Like, I was using some like random Black Diamond backpack that I got from Sierra Trading Post, just like the cheapest one that I could find. I was using like a pretty heavy 2-person tent. I was sharing it, but it was still like, I think a 3 or 4 pound tent, 3.5 pound tent, which, I wouldn't even, that's, to put it in perspective, now I would try to shoot for like a 1 to 1.5 pound shelter when I'm going out. So, and just other things were kind of like, I brought more than I needed. Like, I was pretty dialed. Like, I had read a lot of blog posts and stuff. I think I had, before the JMT, I think I had read Skirka's book, the Ultimate Hiker's Gear Guide. So, like, it was, I think, more dialed in than a lot of people that I met on trail, but not to my, I guess, the standard that I had just like arbitrarily set for myself. So like the whole time I was hiking the JMT, like the wheels were turning. I'm thinking like, okay, so I can replace this with that, this with that, this with that, and then I can save. Because I think I had like a 17-pound base weight. That's the weight of all of your gear minus food and water. And, you know, contrast that with when I set off on the PCT, I had an 8-pound base weight. So I, you know, managed to basically cut it in half. That's
a big difference. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think though you kind of touch on a point that I'm always interested to talk about. The people who end up on these trails and on these adventures, it seems like are the ones who just make the decision to go, and that you can plan forever. And spend, you know, hours and endless amounts of money these days getting your pack dialed in. But especially on the JMT, it sounds like too, you would be somebody who would encourage people to strike out into the wilderness if they have the inclination to do so.
Absolutely. Your gear does not have to be perfect, especially on a trail like the JMT where the weather's usually pretty perfect. You know, I wouldn't tell anyone to go out unprepared. You should definitely do your research and, you know, build up the best gear that you can, but it definitely doesn't have to be perfect. Does not have to be the most expensive stuff. There are plenty of like excellent budget gear lists that you can find on the internet. In fact, I actually have a video on my channel called Ultra Cheap, Ultralight Backpacking Gear, where I just talk about like a lot of stuff that is extremely low cost, but will get the job done and function very well in most situations, especially in the American West. Like that's where ultralight backpacking was born, and that's where, you know, it really thrives, because you can go so light, especially on the PCT, and to a slightly lesser extent the CDT. So I would say do your research and do as best as you can, but it's definitely not all about the gear. It's more about what you have in here. And I would say if you have the inclination and the desire, just get out there and do it, because you never know what's going to happen in your life, right? You know, you could get injured, you could have like something financial happen, like some external factors could prevent you from going out in the future. And especially if you're younger, like, you should just do it.
I love that attitude. Now, how long did the John Muir Trail take you? How long were you on the trail for?
I can't remember. It was somewhere, I think 20 days or something. 21 days. That's including a couple of 0 days. So that's like a pretty relaxed pace. When I went through doing the same stretch of trail, because as we mentioned, the 200 miles of the JMT is shared with the Pacific Crest Trail. When I went through that section again in 2017 on the PCT, I think we covered it in like 9-10 days or something, like pretty fast.
Okay, you were booking. You had a clip.
Yeah. But by that point, you know, I'd been on trail for months, and so you've like a couple months, you've got your trail legs. You know, once you're out there for 3-4 weeks, like you really just get in like absurd shape that you can't get in any other way. Like I've never been able to be in as good a shape off trail as I've managed to get in while through hiking. It's just, how could you, right? I can't. Doesn't matter how much running I do or anything else. It's just, there's no substitute for like walking 30 miles a day every day.
Sure. And I know it's hard to pin a number on it, but it sounds like, and you just threw out that number, 30 miles a day or so. When you get into a rhythm and you're hiking, let's say through the PCT, is that kind of what you're shooting for, in that ballpark of 30 miles a day every day?
I really shot for that on the PCT and CDT. Yeah, when I could, when the terrain allowed it. Like if there's a bunch of snow, like as there was in Colorado on the CDT, that's not really possible. At least not for me. I mean, maybe somebody could, but I was doing more like high teens, low 20s in Colorado. But
Sure.
When it's like smooth, easy tread on the PCT. Like in Oregon, especially, you can do 40 miles in a day.
I love how you
It
just
just
so
depends.
casually. I love how you just so casually say that. I mean, 30 miles a day is over a marathon every day, day in and day out. And up at 40, you're breaching a marathon and a half every day. But it
Well,
sounds
it's
like
tough, and you don't start out with that. Well, actually, word of caution to anybody who's thinking about doing it. You probably should not start out trying to do that kind of mileage, or you could get some serious overuse injuries, which I did on the Pacific Crest Trail. I started out I was really into the idea of doing big miles, and I was pretty serious about it. I had the light pack. I had the mentality like I'm going all for efficiency. Basically walking from sunup to sundown, minimizing breaks, that sort of thing, eating while I'm walking, yada, yada. And so I started with that mindset from the get-go, and I definitely paid the price. After my first section, I started out doing like 24, 25 miles a day in northern Washington, which is one of the most rugged sections of the trail. And I had trained pretty hard. Like I was doing I did like a couple of 20-mile training runs. I was like running a lot before the PCT, but it's just different. It's not the same. I mean, running will get the body in shape for backpacking, but carrying a pack over mountains is just different. So I ended up after my first section of like 4 or 5 days or whatever, a really severe overuse injury. I think it was in my left ankle. So yeah, I was stopped up in Stehekin, a resupply point on the PCT for like 3 days, waiting for the inflammation to go down. Just laying down with my ankle elevated, just like, I think I had some kind of like ice pack that I got and put on it. Oh no, I was icing it in the water, that lake that's right next to Stehekin. The water is so cold that I would just stick my ankle in, and it would help with the inflammation. But yeah, I was stuck there for 3 days, and then when I went back out, I was a little more careful about my pace, and then I worked up to that 30-mile-a-day pace. And by the time I had hit Oregon, which is like 500 miles in, that's when my clip got really, really fast. And the terrain also mellows out a lot in Oregon. It's like it's not flat, but it's not the rugged mountainous terrain of Washington. And so I was able to pretty easily do like between 30 and 35 every day that I was not resupplying. So full trail days were like 30 to 35.
I find that's pretty common for me, is that when I strike out on these big adventures, and it's kind of nice to hear that somebody like yourself maybe suffers from the same thing. In the first few days, by day 3, usually if something bad is going to happen, be it like you need to make a serious alteration with your gear, or in my case, sometimes I've struck out. I bike packed the Colorado Trail, and I found
nice.
that within the first 3 days, the altitude was affecting me so much coming from sea level that I really just had to pump the brakes. So I find those first three, I find those first 3 days are pretty critical for just adjusting and sinking into the trip, if you will.
Yeah, well, that's why people do shakedown hikes before they set out on a thru hike or other long trip. They'll go out for a weekend or a week-long trip, or several of these if they can, before their thru hike. And it's critical, I would say, because if you just go out never having used the stuff, or you don't know how your body's going to react to this or that, then it all like sort of comes crashing down in the first 3 days, and you have to either like quit or make some serious adjustments. So yeah, the shakedown is important.
It's definitely a wake-up call for sure. So what made you decide to go southbound on the PCT as opposed to northbound?
I don't know. I just thought it sounded more appealing. Like, I think especially if you're going for a slightly quicker pace, which I was, the weather window I think is a bit more favorable. So, like, if you try to go faster going northbound, you kind of have to start in May. And you live in SoCal, so you know, like, what the desert is like in May. It's going to be blazing hot. And the reason you have to start a little bit later is because, you know, you don't want to get to the Sierra too early. If you get to the Sierras too early, it's going to be completely snowbound. And a lot of thru hikers will go through a snowbound Sierra anyway, but you want to sort of wait till the melt has got on with a little bit, so you're, you know, making it a bit easier on yourself. So you want to sort of try to time it, getting there, you know, like early June, maybe mid-June, depending on the year. If it's a really high snow year, you might want to, like, that's when northbound hikers have a lot of trouble, is in high snow years on the PCT, like 2017 and 19 were really high snow years. You would have, you know, hikers just waiting at Kennedy Meadows South, unable to go into the Sierra, or the ones that did, some of them got into trouble, either with crazy river crossings or just like way too much snow. It's much harder to keep your pace on consistent snow. So anyway, back to northbound versus southbound. Yeah, in order to time your entry into the Sierra correctly, you have to start later in the desert than I think is optimal. I would rather be in the desert in like April. And it can still be pretty darn hot in April. And then once you get out of the Sierra, going northbound, if you're a little bit faster, you might find yourself in Oregon in July when the mosquitoes are just horrendous. Meanwhile, if you go southbound, you probably hit Oregon more around like early August, when the mosquitoes have calmed down a little bit. And then also for northbounders, if you're going faster, you're not going to have to deal with the rainy and cold weather in Washington. But yeah, so southbound, you have nice conditions in Washington, fewer bugs in Oregon. The Sierra might be cold, and you might get snowed on, but you know, that's something you can basically deal with. And then the desert conditions are fantastic. It's like pretty nice, and it's nice and cool at night, comfortably warm during the day. There are less water sources flowing versus in the spring, but it's nothing that you can't overcome. So I think, yeah, if you're going a little bit faster, the weather window is better for a southbounder. One more thing I will say about that, though, is that given how bad the fire seasons have been, like in recent years, I almost don't know if I would recommend going southbound to people anymore, just because you're probably going to get some pretty big fires in probably by the time you get to Oregon, if you're there in August, especially around the like Oregon-California border. Like Northern California, Southern Oregon is like a total tinderbox. Like that area is always on fire. And so I think your chances of making it going north to south with a continuous footpath and no fire closures are not that good.
Okay.
Given how it's been with the fires lately. So I don't know. I think you have a better chance of avoiding fires if you go northbound. So that's one big plus for going northbound.
It's interesting how many factors you have to put into the calculation when
there's a lot
north versus southbound. Yeah.
But 90% of hikers go north. I still think it's like 90-10 northbound to southbound.
Right. That was my impression, is that north is considerably more common, and it's interesting to hear the 90%. But when you go north 90%, and I think this is coming from a native Southern Californian, is that you hit, I think right away, correct, a pretty substantial desert area with limited water supplies. Yeah,
I mean, and you've got like the aqueduct section, which is pretty dry. You've got the like Mojave with the windmills, which is pretty dry. But there are also like some higher elevation areas like San Jacinto, the area around, a lot of the like 100 to 200 miles just north of the border. You go through some mountainous areas that are a little bit better for water, but there are, some dry stretches. South of Tehachapi, I think is, pretty dry, around Walker Pass. Yeah, south of Walker Pass, there's a really long dry section, but that's a little bit further north into SoCal.
It's interesting, though, just hearing you talk. It sounds like that can be overcome, or that is routinely, I guess, overcome by all these northbound hikers right away. It's not maybe not a huge obstacle.
Well, it gets easier every year. You used to have to rely on like the water report, like printed out or whatever, but now with like through hiking apps, I guess it used to be Gut Hook, now it's called Far Out. But anyway, like these apps for every trail where, hikers who have come before you will like comment on every water source and say flowing like 1 liter per minute or something. And they might say just a trickle might be dry in a week, something like that. Maybe 10 years ago, you wouldn't have had, even 5 years ago, would not have been as easy to be confident in water sources as it is now. I guess, well, 5 years ago was 2017, or no, 6 years ago. Wow, time flies. It was pretty good. The apps a lot of people were using them when I did the PCT, so it was pretty easy for me too. I'm not like saying back in my day.
Sure. The access of information always makes it easier. Now, how long did it take you to hike the PCT?
I did it in like 113 days.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So on the kind of the magnitude of about 4 months is what your scope is here. Did you go through a range of emotions as you were hiking this, or were you motivated the whole time to continue and do this?
Yeah, there were times where I was like kind of a mess on the PCT, where like I just kind of got burnt out and sort of wanted to quit. I think two times really I strongly considered quitting. Like once was in Northern California, just because it was just starting to feel a little bit like a grind, and there was a lot of wildfire smoke, and I was just getting burnt out. But I kept going because I really wanted to go through the Sierra, and because I had recently made some friends on trail, and things had gotten a little better. I did a lot of Oregon by myself, so I was getting like a little bit lonely. But things sort of picked up again after Northern California. I enjoyed the Sierra, even though we did get snowed on. And then once I finished the Sierra, I also had like another like period of kind of wanting to quit because I thought the desert was going to be just like really boring, which I was wrong. It was not boring. It was fantastic. But I thought like, I already have seen the most beautiful section. I could just go home. I was like kind of tired, but I'm really glad that I didn't. I'm really glad that I kept going, because the desert in October is fantastic.
It seems like you have a great memory of the desert section.
Yeah, it was actually one of my favorites. I don't know, a lot of people, it's not, but maybe it's because for northbounders, that's like when you're getting all of your like aches and pains out of the way and like figuring out your gear and settling into a rhythm. But by the time I had reached Southern California, like I had everything down already because I had been out there for quite a while. And so it was kind of just like easy cruising. Mm-hmm. And the sunsets were incredible. The sunsets and sunrises, because less daylight. So I was awake and walking for every sunrise and sunset. And as you know, in the desert, they're beautiful.
They are. That's really interesting too, to hear your day, is that it starts early and it ends late, and you're you're walking, you're out there in the elements, experiencing it all.
Yeah, I would say like on my thru hikes on average, I would walk like 12, maybe 13 hours a day. Probably not much more than that. The times where I was really trying to push it, I might do a 14-hour day, but that is kind of more on the extreme end of the spectrum. I would not do that very often.
Sure. Now, you mentioned that through, like, for example, it sounds like the Sierras, as you were entering the Sierras, kind of grouped up with people and had kind of hiking partners. But is your intention when you do these through hikes to go out there alone and to experience it, or is it to meet new people? How do you approach that?
I used to be way more into the idea of solitude. That was actually part of the reason that I went southbound, is I had heard about like all the crowds of people going north, and I was like, oh, well, I want to be out in the wilderness, so I'll go southbound where there will be fewer people. But I think I kind of, I don't know, grew out of that. I don't know if grew out of it is the right way to put it, because it's more just like a preference. But I realized that I actually really enjoy hiking with people, maybe more than I enjoy hiking alone. And so when I started the CDT, I started it with the friends that I had made on the PCT, although they only did New Mexico and a little bit of Colorado, then they had to go home. And then I made some other friends in Colorado that I stuck with for most of the rest of the way. So I actually did very little of the CDT by myself. And I do enjoy solitude, and there were stretches on both trails where I would, like either deliberately go a little bit ahead or hang back so I could, hike by myself for a bit. Just because it can be, a refreshing change of pace, and, spend a lot of time with your thoughts and just kind of be more immersed in your surroundings. Because when you do hike with friends, it can be, chatty, and you're, spending time with the people you're with. And so, which is great, but you can be a little bit less focused on your surroundings and what you're doing. And so a solo hike, you do get a lot more of that immersion in the mountains, which is nice.
I can definitely relate to that. I think you and I are on the same boat. As I definitely enjoy my solo trips, but hiking with groups is always fun. There's pros and cons to both, I guess, is how I phrase it.
Yeah, and the great thing is you don't have to choose just one. You can do both whenever you want.
I like that attitude, right? There's no need to choose. Now, after the PCT, did you immediately know that you were going to do the CDT, the Continental?
No, I was joking with the people that I was hiking with that we would never do the CDT. We were just we kind of had a bad attitude. We were like happy to be done with it. We were really tired.
Sure.
And we were like, yeah, we'll never do the CDT. And then, 2 years later, I'm like, shoot, I really need to do the CDT. Then there I was.
I know this more from marathons, and I think it probably applies even more so to what you're doing. They always say that you have to forget your last marathon before you're willing to contemplate your next one. And I imagine that applies tenfold in the world of thru hiking.
Yeah, you need to have some memory loss before you can get back out there.
Okay.
Well, because you forget about like all of the bad stuff, being hot or cold or hungry or thirsty or dirty, and you just remember, like you see it with rose tinted glasses, you just remember all of the nice times and the pretty mountains and like how good it felt to be out there. Because like once you're out there for that long, you do feel like really good. You have so much energy, and you get on like the most natural sleep schedule. Like you just go to sleep and then rise with the sun, and then you go to bed when the sun goes down, and you sleep like a rock. And I would get like 8-9 hours of just like dead sleep every night, and so you feel amazing pretty much like every day. Unless, not every day. You'll have bad days. But, so you remember that stuff more than you remember, I was cold, or, my rain jacket soaked through, or I felt like crap on this day. I don't know, those kind of fade, and the good stuff comes to the forefront.
Sure, sure.
As with anything like that.
Of course. Now, I'm imagining a lot of people are thinking, like, career-wise, how do you have the time, or how do you balance being able to take months off at a time to pursue these major hikes?
Yeah, it's tough, and really what it comes down to is you have to prioritize it, kind of above almost like everything else in your life at the time. Like you'll hear, I think the vast majority of thru hikers have just quit their job. You know, no matter what it is, maybe, yeah, it doesn't matter what, they probably had to quit their job because, yeah, very few employers or careers give you the flexibility to say, hey, I'm peacing out for 4 months, you know, I'll see you in September or whatever. But I was in education when I did my 2 long thru hikes, and I was fresh out of my undergrad, and I was substitute teaching, and I was a music major. I had a music ed degree, so I was like sort of the music sub for this art school where I lived, and the flexibility is, you know, unlike really any other job. You know, it's not like with most jobs you're in every day and you have to like put in a request or whatever, or tell your boss that you want to be off for whatever week or whatever you can get. But with subbing, it's like you get a call and they ask you if you want to come in today, and you can just say no, which is like, it's crazy. And like once I sort of like put the pieces together, it was right around the time where like the hiking bug had really got me, and I was like, wow, thinking about the PCT. I started to put 2 and 2 together. I just started subbing, and I was like, wow, this could be the perfect setup. So I lived extremely frugally and just put all of my savings. I didn't like really do anything else for fun. I just put all of my money toward saving up for doing the trail. And, you know, I just told the school I was at, hey, I'm doing this thing. Will you have me back in September? And they were like, yeah, sure. So it was like very casual, and it allowed me to do these amazing trips.
That's fantastic. I like how you just kind of casually dropped that you're going on a 4-month journey.
Yeah, and because of the nature of the job, that, you know, they're fine with it.
Yeah. Okay. That's really cool. That's what I noticed when I was riding the CT, talking to all the thru hikers. It seemed like you mentioned, a lot of people who were in transition between one job and another, and then there was another big group that was between undergrad and grad school. You know, kind of, so they had a window to do one of these bigger hikes, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, and some people do have just like the dream setup where they have, I don't know, like investments or something, and they are just like on permanent or like retired early, so their life's a permanent vacation. I have a couple friends who kind of fall into that I met on trail, but
if only, right?
Yeah.
Now, after the CDT, at least from kind of watching your videos, it seems like the nature of your hiking maybe shifted a little bit to more high route stuff. Is that how you think about it in your head?
Yeah, it's definitely been a progression, like a trajectory in that direction. And the CDT, the Continental Divide Trail, was sort of like the perfect sort of almost transition to that style of hiking. When you say high route, for the people who are listening who don't know,
please.
Basically, the emphasis is on off-trail travel and staying as high as possible without getting too technical. By technical, I mean like rock climbing. So usually a high route will highlight like one mountain range or a certain feature in a mountain range. And the most famous one is and I guess the original is called the Sierra High Route, put together by Steve Roper, And that route, it starts in the Northern Sierra and goes basically not the entire length of the range, but most of it. And it's 195 miles, so a little bit shorter than the John Muir Trail. But the nature of the hike is completely different. Maybe 2/3 of it are off trail, cross country, and then a little bit more of it is on like lesser used trails, and then a small portion it actually shares with the John Muir Trail. So traveling through mountains like the Sierra without a trail is a pretty different experience. Because if you've ever been on something like the JMT and you sort of just like look around you, you're like, man, if it wasn't for this trail, I'd be having a really hard time getting over this pass. Because usually it's just like loose rock in one form or another. Like it could be scree, which is like small chunks of rock, or talus, which is bigger chunks of rock, anywhere from like microwave to refrigerator sized. And it can be a scary moment when you're like hopping over these giant boulders and then one of them moves underneath you, and you have to like quickly identify another one that's safe to hop to, and it's sort of just like this endless thing of just hopping from boulder to boulder, and sometimes they move underneath your feet. And then sometimes there's scrambling on more solid rock up to class 3, and what that means, that's referring to the Yosemite decimal system, which has been used for many years to rate rock climbs. So class 1 means walking just along an easy trail. Class 2 is scrambling, where like you might have to use your hands for balance, but you're not really putting any weight on them. You might have to like reach out to the side and, you know, put your hand on a rock to do this or that. Class 3 scrambling is where you actually have to put a little bit of weight on your hands, and there's a bit of exposure. So like if you fell, you might get banged up or hurt pretty bad. Definitely not going to be like vertical. So it's not rock climbing, but you are pulling with your hands. And that's usually where the line is drawn for this style of hiking, trying to like keep it class 3 and under. Because once you get into class 4, that's basically real rock climbing, like without a rope. So people will frequently solo class 4 terrain without a rope. But it's inherently risky because part of what defines class 4 is like exposure to the point of like a fall would probably be fatal, or it could be. And then class 5 is like where real rock climbing begins, where like you're definitely roped up. And then from there you've got like 5-1, 5-2, 5-3, all the way up to 5-12, 13, 14, like extreme high end stuff, you know, like Tommy Caldwell on the Dawn Wall, sort of stuff. But it's cool because it's all the same system, straight from walking all the way up to like extreme rock climbing. And you know, high routes sort of fall somewhere in the middle there.
That's a great overview, and really kind of an in-depth explanation of what's going on here. So if we kind of back up and take a look at it, one of the things that you mentioned is that moving from the John Muir Trail to the Sierra, to the high route, is that for substantial portions of it, you don't have a trail. And so, I notice for myself when I'm out in the wilderness and you transition from a trail to no trail, that it dramatically changes the experience, and you feel, I guess the way I would describe it is very much out there.
Oh yeah.
Okay. And so were you looking for that after these thru hikes, that you needed more of a sense of adventure, more of a sense of the unknown? What was the motivation there?
Yeah, I think what motivated me there, and what still does, is just like, I don't know, sort of pushing into wilder feeling places, just more remote terrain, places where it feels like no one has been there, even though like everything is explored pretty much. But, you know, sort of feeling kind of like an explorer, like you're venturing into places where, you know, no one else really goes. And sometimes that's the case. Like there are places in the Sierra that receive, you know, basically no visitors, maybe like a visitor every year or every, you know, a handful of people in a year will go to these places. Contrast that with the, you know, JMT, where everywhere you go, you're you know, you could bump into another hiker. So yeah.
So does that mean when you were on the high route, you would go days without seeing another person?
Yeah, and I've not done a high route by myself. That's something that I want to eventually do, but it's intimidating to me, just because you have to be entirely self-reliant, and you are pretty far out there. And if you got hurt, like nobody's going to find you.
Sure.
Probably not anyway. Because even if you're going up like a pass that's on the Sierra High Route, like you could be like just going up like a route up the pass that could be out of view from another person who might be traveling that same pass. But yeah, so we were talking about going stretches of days without seeing anyone. So on the Yosemite High Route, which I was on in 2020, as part of a larger high route, we'll probably get into this, which we called the Super Sierra High Route, which was a hiking the full length of the Sierra, Yosemite, all the way down to Mount Whitney, high route style. But it started with the Yosemite High Route, and I think we went like 5 days. It was me and two friends that I had met on the Continental Divide Trail. I think we went the first 5 days without seeing anybody.
Wow. Okay. You were alone out there.
Yeah. So if I had been solo, then yeah, not another person for 5 days.
Well, and that's what I noticed when I watched the Super Sierra High Route video. There's simply more shots of you and your friends looking at the map and just kind of making those decisions versus, you know, right on the PCT, on the CDT. It seems like that navigation, I don't want to say is trivial, but in comparison is significantly less of a challenge, maybe.
Yeah, well, it's a big part of hiking a high route is the navigation, reading a topo map. And I guess I didn't quite get to touch on like how the Continental Divide Trail is sort of like a transition almost to like this high route and off trail style of hiking, because there are sections on the CDT where the trail is either non-existent or like pretty overgrown. But the Continental Divide Trail Coalition is working very hard to complete the entire CDT, and I'm sure it gets better every year. And I'm sure that the experience on it now in 2023 would be a lot more trail probably than when I did it in 2019. And when I did it in 2019, it was, you know, more trail than it was 5 years before that. So it's getting better and better. But I think still there are going to be these stretches of like off trail where you almost like get to practice and get used to what that feels like. And I sort of, that's where I caught the bug for off-trail travel. You know, especially there were long stretches in Colorado where even if there was a trail, it was covered by snow. So it was effectively off-trail travel. And I got really hooked on like the mental engagement aspect of it. Like when you're just sort of cruising along a trail, you can kind of tune out and, you know, you don't have to pay a whole lot of attention on the PCT because, you know, there are the blazes on the trees, or not blazes, but the trail emblems on the trees every so often, and the tread is always really good. So you can definitely tune out, but when you're off trail, you can't really do that, or you could get into a really bad situation if you're just like walking aimlessly off trail, tuning out. Yeah, you could realize, wow, I have no idea where I am, and that would be bad. So
absolutely. Yeah. And that combined with, you know, when I was watching your Super Sierra High Route video, I think I was just kind of taken aback of, I tried to put myself in the, you know, in your spot of you're at the bottom of a meadow, you know, still extremely high altitude above the tree lines, with a lake. and you're looking above you at this pass that is either a class 2 or 3. And it seems like, your group, you and your friends would kind of consciously look at it and try to scope out what is the best route to get over this. Is that kind of your approach and mindset?
Yeah. So with a high route, there's like macro and micro navigation. Like macro navigation is like, I'm standing on pass A, I like open up my map and I identify pass B across the way, and I know that's where I need to go. That's macro navigation. Micro navigation is how am I going to get there? And sometimes you can see, like from a vantage point, like a pretty good route, and then try to stick to it as best you can, and then adapt as, you get closer to terrain features. They might seem different than they did from far away. But you try to like visually form the line that you're going to take. And then, like I said, adapt as you're going. If you're standing at the base of a path, sometimes it can be difficult to see like what the top is really like, especially if it's a longer climb. But you try your best. And you can also look at your topo map and look at the contour lines and like see areas where they're closer together. That means it's going to be steeper there. So you might want to try to avoid that and pick a line up to the top of the pass where the contour lines are wider. For a little refresher on topographic maps. So you've got your contour lines, and that's basically how you read the terrain. It's those squiggly lines all over a map, and one contour line represents the same elevation along its length. And so that's how you can identify the shape of the terrain by looking at a map, is with the contour lines.
Okay, let's circle back on this class 3 section a little bit here, because I know from my rock climbing experience that I often find that in the guidebooks, who are largely written by rock climbers who are thinking of the 5 scale, so the vertical rock climbing, they're often, or can be, a little bit dismissive of the class 3, kind of waving that away because it's relatively trivial or a little bit easier for a rock climber with minimal gear to pass through a class 2, 3, or potentially even 4 short section. But you doing it with a pack on has got to be a different beast altogether.
Yeah, it changes the game completely, because I rock climb too, and a class 3 section without a pack is pretty easy peasy. So it's easy to see how, like in a guidebook, it could be listed as an afterthought. But yeah, with 25 pounds or so on your back, maybe more in certain cases if you're doing a long section, it can make it pretty tough to keep your balance. It's important to have keep your pack weight down, because it really, like a heavy pack is a liability in a high route situation. Doing class 3 scrambling and stuff, you definitely don't want a heavy pack.
And now on that Super Sierra route, I think there was one particular pass or mountain, and I'm trying to recall the actual name, that it sounded like you guys struggled with a little bit in terms of it just took you longer to climb, and it kind of went into the night. Oh,
yeah, that was Mount Baxter.
Okay.
Yep, I'll never forget that one. It was basically, it felt like kind of like a disaster, but not, I mean, that's a little dramatic, but we underestimated how long it would take so we had to like go over this mountain, because in this one situation, going over a mountain and down was actually easier, like better quality rock than going over the pass that was just to the right of the mountain. So the summit was actually technically a little bit better travel than the pass. So we had to go up to the top and then down the other side into the next area. And we sort of just underestimated how long it would take us to get to the top. And because there was like this gully that we had to do first that had a lot of loose rock in it. And then the climb to the summit was sort of like along this ridge that had like all these broken, like medium-sized chunks of rock that could like best be described as like broken pieces of sidewalk almost. Just like these chunky broken slabs of rock. And they were not very stable, and so you couldn't go too fast on it. and there was like a little bit of exposure because it wasn't like the widest ridge. So you just had to take your time. And especially near the top, the loose rock felt a little bit sketchy, and, it just time dragged on and on. And by the time we reached the summit, the sun was going down, which is not what we planned. We thought we would be down the other side by the time sun was going down. So we looked down the other side and we're like, oh, God, it's just as bad as the way up. But maybe it's just like bad in a different way. The other side was like a talus field, like a pretty steep talus field, loose, of course, and we were losing light fast. So we found ourselves in this situation where we were navigating down this steep and loose talus field with probably mostly like microwave-sized rocks in the dark by headlamp, which, I mean, there's no other way to put it. It's just not ideal, and it's not very safe.
Right.
So, had the shakes a little bit, but in those situations, all you can do is like, you can't let the like fear and nervousness overwhelm you, or else you're just increasing the chances that you're going to make a mistake. So you have to just sort of look at the situation objectively and say, I need to just execute this to get out of it safely. And when you sort of remove the personal side of it, like that fear and anxiety, and just sort of act as an objective, objectively.
You can get through it.
That's the only way you can do it, really. Yeah.
Sure. Now, as wild as it sounds, my youngest brother actually at this point prefers hiking at night because he likes the idea of, I think, really just the outside world kind of fading away, and you are only focused on what can be lit up by the headlamp.
It can be cool. Yeah.
Okay. But it sounds like in that particular case, it was very unnerving.
I was not relaxed at all. It was tense. But again, I said this earlier, it's all relative. Like, my friend Armstrong, that's his trail name, who I was with, he was like laughing and having fun. So, because he's done a lot more off-trail travel in the Sierra than I have. He grew up in the Sierra, grew up hiking in the Sierra. So, it didn't faze him as much as it fazed me. So it's all relative. But night hiking can definitely be fun under certain circumstances, right? On that same route, we went over Mather Pass in the dark. And Mather Pass is a pass along the John Muir Trail, so it's got a nice trail up and down the other side. So it's easy footing. You don't have to really worry about that. And there was like an almost full moon, and we didn't even really have to have our headlamps on that high or at all. It was just such a cool experience seeing the Sierra at night like that. So it depends. It can be awesome, or it can be, usually it's awesome when you plan to do it. It's when you didn't plan to do it is when you're probably going to have a bad time.
I can understand that. And I think probably a lot of people, though, are wondering, specifically with Mount Baxter, right? Why couldn't you just stop at the top, enjoy a beautiful sunset and a rare sunset, right, from Mount Baxter, and just spend the night there?
It's nowhere to camp. It was just like all sharp, pointy rocks. So, I mean, if you enjoy sleeping on sharp, pointy rocks, then I guess you could do that. And I wouldn't trust putting because I think we all had inflatable sleeping pads, and right. The odds of them surviving and light ones too. So the odds of those surviving the night on that kind of rock, weather-wise, it would have been fine. But
okay, now would you say that this is a fair statement here, that one of the factors of transitioning from normal backpacking to high route is that in certain segments, for example, up and over Mount Baxter, there's just nowhere to stop. And so once you decide to go over it, you're kind of committed a little bit to either going all the way over or retreating in the case of inclement weather or night, versus when you're out on a normal backpacking trip, within reason, you can find a place to camp virtually anywhere.
Yeah, that's fair. So that brings to mind actually a specific scenario where we had to go over this pass and there was a thunderstorm brewing up overhead, and we had to time it such that we were over and down the other side somewhere where we could safely pitch our shelters by the time the thunderstorm started. So sometimes it can be a little bit of a gamble, where like if you time it wrong, I've actually been in this situation several times. Kind of think of it as kind of common, like a just a game that you play on high routes in the mountains. Should I go over the pass before the storm, or try to rush it and get over it before it starts, or get over it before it starts. Because same kind of deal with like up on Mount Baxter. You're in this rocky, desolate terrain. There's nowhere really to pitch a shelter or like lay down or anything. So you probably don't want to stay there for a long time. Also, greater risk of getting hit by lightning if like you're up high near the top of a pass and it starts thundering and lightning. You really want to get low as quick as you can. So it's a question of, do I go back the way I came, or do I think I can get over it before the storm starts?
I know that's always... It's always in my mind, and when I was on the CT, the same thing, right? You would have to look ahead, and you would visibly see, especially in Colorado in the summer, where you get these afternoon rainstorms, you would see the clouds were rolling in, and you'd kind of have to make the call, right? Can you make it up and over? Did you experience a lot of that in the Sierras as well?
Not so much. Like that was almost an everyday occurrence on like the Colorado section of not every day, but it was very common on the Colorado section of the CDT. The monsoon is just more active there. The afternoon thunderstorms are more intense and more regular. It's less of a thing in the Sierra, but it still does happen, like the afternoon thunderstorms. We actually did the whole Super Sierra high route and had one afternoon thunderstorm. 23 days and one afternoon thunderstorm. And that's like pretty common actually. And it depends on the year. Some years it's more active than others. But generally better in the Sierra than in the Rockies.
Relatively pleasant weather. And I'm actually realizing as we're talking now, I think we've talked about the Super Sierra high route a little bit, but we haven't given a formal definition to it. Are you the first one to do that link up?
Maybe the first to do that exact link up. Actually, when we were out there, we met this other guy who was solo, who had actually done a longer route that was very similar. Like he started up by Tahoe and went all the way down to the Southern Sierra. I never saw him again, so I don't know like how the rest of his route went, but we met him pretty far south in the Sierra, so I think it went okay. But we started in Yosemite, kind of near Sonora Pass area, and went all the way through Yosemite, down through like the Central Sierra, all the way down to Mount Whitney. So it was 305 miles our route was. So basically mostly the entire length of the Sierra Nevada. But this guy that we met, he had started even further north up by Tahoe and did like high route style hiking all the way down to the Southern Sierra too. So, and I know for a fact that other people had combined Roper's Sierra high route and the Southern Sierra high route in previous years. The Southern Sierra high route is a 105-mile route that goes from like Bishop Pass down to Mount Whitney, and you could pretty easily combine the original Sierra high route with the Southern Sierra high route because they overlap in Doozy Basin, which is just over the crest from Bishop Pass. So very easy to combine those routes, and I know of people who had done that combination in years prior. I had not heard of anybody because the Yosemite high route was pretty new at that point too. It had only been around for like a couple years or something. It's an Andrew Skirka route. So we were the first that I knew of to do a specific link up of the Yosemite High Route, the Sierra High Route, and the Southern Sierra High Route. But you know, plenty of people do amazing things and don't post about them on the internet. So you never know.
Right. And the motivation specifically for the link up in your case, right? I'm sure you probably went over this in more detail, but the way I kind of thought about it, right, is if you, with the John Muir Trail, it's a very established trail and a very natural start and ending at Whitney and Yosemite. In the case of the Sierra High Route, or in all high routes really for that matter, it seems like just given the nature of what they are, there is less of a while they do start and stop at specific points, you often have to get creative to access those points. And you were trying to, was your goal to emulate sort of a high route of the John Muir Trail?
Yeah, that was kind of my thinking. I mean, the Sierra High Route kind of does that, but it veers off from the JMT as it goes south and ends more in the southwestern Sierra at Rhodes End. So the trailheads for the Sierra High Route are not like they're kind of just where he wanted to start and end the route. Whereas like going from Yosemite to Whitney feels like a little more natural. The Sierra High Route starts at like Twin Lakes and ends at Rhodes End, which those are not like famous landmarks or anything like Yosemite Valley and Mount Whitney are. And our route didn't start in Yosemite Valley, but it went from basically the furthest northern reaches of Yosemite National Park all the way down to Mount Whitney. So there was an element of wanting to like sort of like do a more natural line through the Sierra, where I think like Roper's vision was maybe just like going north-south through the Sierra, seeing like what he felt were the most beautiful places and like the best travel. And he really did an excellent job of that, because basically everywhere that his route travels through is mostly smooth travel, like beautiful alpine places. So his route is fantastic. This was more just, you know, it's kind of cool to go from Yosemite to Whitney.
Absolutely. Now, does your pack setup change from transitioning from through hiking to high route?
A little bit, but not really. I mean, for the Sierra, I need to have a bear canister. There's really no way around it. So that's the main thing, but there is more overlap than there are differences. Like, I might change my shoes for a high route versus a trail. Like, on a trail, I would more value just, like, cushion and, like, a softer shoe. Where on a high route, I want like a grippier outsole, maybe a little bit tighter fit, maybe a bit firmer ride, just because you're doing all this like rock hopping, scrambling, like a soft cushiony shoe that is great on trail can sometimes be a bit of a liability on off-trail stuff. That's kind of like one big one.
It's interesting to hear though. It seems like by and large, the setup is almost identical, or at least largely the same when you're kind of attempting with these.
You don't need any special gear. Yep. Versus regular backpacking. Yeah. Absolutely.
Now, you had attempted the Sierra High Route earlier and actually had to bail off that one. Is that correct?
Yep, that's true. So in 2018...
Do you have a video of that? Do you have a video of that I just missed, or...
Yes, I do have a video of that. You might have to scroll back a little ways in the channel. I think that one is called Trail Boy Meets High Route.
Okay.
It's basically about me getting my ass handed to me by a section of the Sierra High Route. That was between the PCT and the CDT. That was 2018. So that summer, I just sort of like went out to the West Coast and was just going to do like a random mix of things between semesters, or not semesters, but the school years ending and starting in September. Like I did a section of the PCT actually to make up for a bit that I had missed due to wildfires in 2017. And then but I ended up doing like way more just for fun. I did like 500 miles in Oregon and a bit of NorCal, just because, hey, why not? And then I went down to the Sierra, and yeah, my goal was just to do like one section of the Sierra High Route, and I had like the guidebook, and I picked sort of like what I thought would be like a mix of easier terrain relative to that route and like easy access point. So I picked a section that started over Bishop Pass, which is very easy to access. There's like a shuttle that runs right to that trailhead, and then, you know, once you hike over Bishop Pass, you're like, boom, you're right there. And so I thought, yeah, I'll just do like this 80-mile section or something, and, you know, I'll get comfortable with off-trail terrain, and, you know, then, you know, next year I'll be able to come back and do the whole thing. But that's not what happened at all. I had never been on that sort of stuff before, and like the very first off-trail pass I did was like basically traumatizing. Like it was Alpine Call, which is it's kind of near Evolution Basin. You sort of like leave Evolution Basin, veer off trail to the right, and then like go up into this very beautiful alpine area called Darwin Bench. And then from there, you cross over the main Sierra Crest, I think or is it the, anyway, you cross over this pass and into Humphreys Basin. And the pass that I went over, Alpine Call, was pretty smooth on the way up, but then the way down was just awful. It was all of these like really big boulders, like huge talus, pretty unstable, which like now I probably wouldn't bat an eye at, but at the time, like I hadn't been on stuff like that before, and I'm like feeling these rocks move under my feet, and it's freaking me out, and like my heart rate is going up, and I'm like getting a little shaky. And I get down to the bottom, and I'm like, oh my! Like I'm talking to my camera. I'm like, this is it. You know, I can't do it after that. Like I got to get off, and you know. So I did. The next morning, I was going through Humphreys Basin, got on the Paiute Pass Trail, which leads to the John Muir Trail, and then I did like a couple days going north on the JMT. And then I actually hopped back on the Sierra High Route for a bit, sort of near the Mammoth Crest. And I did like a short little section there that was much mellower, and I had a great time. So the route actually, or the trip actually did end on a high note. So I started out with like this awful traumatic pass experience, and then I did like a little bit of JMT, and then I got back on the high route at an easier section, and you know, got my confidence back up a little bit. So that was my first foray into off-trail backpacking, and it was a mix.
Well, there's a couple things that you touched on that I think are really insightful and really interesting to talk through. One of the things is that often in these off-trail experiences, going down can be significantly more challenging than going up.
Yeah, definitely. Because you know, when you're going against gravity, it's sort of like more controlled motions, but, you know, kind of like skiing or downhill mountain biking, you know, those activities I think objectively are a little bit more dangerous than rock climbing, because rock climbing, yeah, it's like slow and controlled mostly. Whereas when you're doing these sports where like gravity's at your back, so to speak, you're a lot less in control. You're much more at the mercy of, well, gravity. And that obviously that's to a way lesser degree climbing down a pass than like skiing or mountain biking, but still gravity at your back makes things a little more precarious sometimes.
Absolutely. And then another aspect here is and good for you, that I find that when you go through a tough experience, it's very, very hard to recover and continue forward with the trip. But it sounds like to an extent you overcame that and were able to get back on the high route.
Yeah, I think I sort of just needed a mental break from it. Like if I continued going north on the high route, I probably would have been overwhelmed and just not enjoyed it at all. But having, I was very comfortable on trail by that point. So just having a couple days cruising on the JMT, put some distance between me and that bad thing that had happened, and allowed me to sort of just mentally recover from it.
And that's something that I've taken away, that I think maybe everybody can benefit from, even if you're doing like just the JMT, right? And maybe you're overwhelmed. You have the ability to hop off for a day or two and just hang out in a town,
Sure.
before jumping back on. I mean, if that's the case. So there's a lot of flexibility in the outdoors. I always think it's good to remember that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the schedule that we have, we impose on ourselves, unless you have like a flight you got to make or something. But
Sure. A lot of my adventures, like you, are in between as a semester ends, and then a lot of my best adventures are when a semester ends and before an internship starts. And usually you have a 2-week window, which has caused problems really with that time constraint is what I would say on that one. Now, as you've done a few different high routes, but it seems like lately you've shifted more towards alpinism or mountaineering. How would you classify that?
yeah, I don't really, in my mind, I don't think that I have.
Okay.
That you're referring to a video that I posted recently called "Thru Hiker Tries Mountaineering," where I was visiting a friend who lives in Seattle, and we were thinking of like just cool mountain objectives we could try. She's much more accomplished than I am. Like she's, been climbing mountains, mountaineering and stuff in the Cascades for years and years. So I was eager to just pick up a few things from her. So we were like going through guidebooks and kind of just thinking about what we could do that would be like just outside of my comfort zone, but nothing crazy. When you're talking about like improving at anything, there's like, what do they call it in education? The zone of proximal development, where like if you want to pick things that are right in that zone for like optimal learning and improvement. Like if you do something that's just below that zone, like too easy, then you're not going to have like optimal learning and improvement. And if it's too hard, you'll you or the student will get like discouraged and have a bad time. So there's like a sweet spot that I think we were sort of like trying to hit, where I'd be stretched a bit but still have a good time. And we did a couple of trips. We went to Mount Adams, which is the second tallest volcano in Washington, second to Rainier. And that was basically just a steep snow climb. You kind of just go straight up. There's no twists or turns or anything. It's just like head straight for the top. I wouldn't describe it really as technical. We did the whole thing in like microspike style traction. We had ice axes. I had mine out for a little bit. Mostly they were used on the descent just to control our glissade down. But that was that was a good little like confidence builder for steep snow. 'Cause it was steep, but nothing crazy. But just to put it in perspective, on our way down, we did encounter somebody who had just hurt themselves pretty bad because they got off the main route and started going down like this really steep ski run, and they had fallen, and they told us that like they just bought their ice axe like the day before, and like barely were able to self-arrest and like cut up their hands really bad like on the snow. And they the person was found by two skiers who helped them get back up to the main trail area. And when we came upon this scene, it was the guy who had gotten injured and these two skiers, and we helped like bandage his hands up and stuff, and we hiked all the way back to the parking lot with him, sort of giving him like pointers on glissading safely with the axe, and like how to go down the steep snow safely. So like plunge stepping versus like walking normally. Plunge stepping is where like you lead with your heel, to like kick in a good step so you can walk straight down a steep snow slope. So yeah, elements of mountaineering there, but like not super technical. And then after that, we went and did a trip to the Picket Range in North Cascades National Park. And the Picket Range is super remote and really just truly incredible. Like, I don't know if you have you ever been there? It's amazing.
I've never been. I lived in Seattle for a short period of time, and I will say I hope to return to Seattle to experience mainly the great outdoors surrounding it.
Yeah, so the Cascades on the like pretty much every area of North Cascades National Park is phenomenal, but like the Picket Range just seems like the jewel of the park, and it's pretty tough to get there. Like, you have to walk, it's not like that long of an approach, but it's really kind of a pain in the butt. You have to go like straight up through the woods for like 2 miles, over which you gain like 4,000 feet of elevation. So like 2,000 feet per mile, that's like that's really steep. And it's like not a nice trail. It's like a crappy climber's trail through the woods, like very overgrown. And then you have to go over a steep snowy pass and down into a basin, and then boom, there are the pickets. And they're just like the most jagged and majestic, mountain range you could imagine. So we went there to climb one mountain called West McMillan Spire. And West McMillan Spire is like somehow class 3 in like a sea of peaks that are way more technical. Mm-hmm. And so that was our objective. And to get there, like you go over this pass, you're in this basin called Terror Basin. It's a lot of fun names in the Picket Range. The mountains are called like Terror, Fury. But anyway, so
do they live up to their names?
I think so. I mean, they are very intimidating looking. So I imagine the people who named them, like that's what they were thinking. But anyway, so it was like 20 miles, and we took like 2.5 days to do it. It was so slow. Part of that being me, like I was just like pretty slow and cautious on the snow. But for the climb itself, we had to go up like a very steep snow chute, probably like 45, 50 degrees. And then there was like a clean class 3 like slab climb all the way to the summit. And then the summit block itself was like very exposed. And a little bit spooky for me. The moves were very easy, as we sort of touched on before, like relative to real rock climbing, class 3 is not hard. But when you toss in exposure, it almost doesn't matter. Like if you're not that comfortable with the exposure, it can be frightening. And I didn't have a heavy pack on, just like we had left some stuff at camp, and I just had like a day pack kind of thing. But still, yeah, spooky exposure, and the steep snow to get up to the final pitch, so to speak, was real like white knuckle for me. Like I was like just digging my ice axe into the snow, and like my friend had gone first, and she was like kicking these really good steps for me, and I'm just like so tense the whole time.
That's right. I think you mentioned that. Did she have to break trail on that particular route, or was there an already established where people had kind of put in the footsteps beforehand?
I mean, there were steps here and there. Like sometimes they were better than others. Like they, at that time of year, the melt is pretty rapid, and so even if someone was there like a day or two before, the steps could melt out. So there were steps here and there. I would say the only part she like really needed to lead for my sake was that one steep snow gully. And she had like burly trail running shoes and like legitimate aluminum crampons. And so she was able to kick these really, really good steps. So I was kind of just like going up this snow ladder with my ice axe and like a trekking pole in the other hand. But still, it was spooky. And then going down was even worse.
Sure.
And I'm sure she would have been comfortable like plunge stepping down it, but we ended up going down facing the slope, which is a little bit safer. But it was agonizingly slow, and like I was just death grip on the ice axe, and by the time I got down to the bottom, I was spent.
It could take a lot out of you, those sorts of adventures. Wow, though, that seems like an amazing journey and a really rewarding kind of hike and foray into, I would call that full-on mountaineering.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, like sort of entry-level mountaineering. Like,
sure.
You know, it can get a lot more intense than that, but yeah, I think it's fair to call it, you know, mountaineering or whatever.
So now, as you look towards the future, are you hoping to do more mountaineering trips, more high routing? What's in the future here?
I think my focus I still look at myself as like a backpacker first and foremost. And my main interest at this point in time is doing high routes. So I'm gonna, you know, keep chipping away at that. I had a failed high route attempt in the Sierra this past summer, basically just due to my buddy getting sick, and so we had to bail. And then I just, you know, I didn't have the oomph to go back and do it by myself, so just sort of went home. So that's still on my list. That's the Kings Canyon High Basin route.
Okay.
Actually, a big interest of mine is kind of scouting out my own route. That's what I would like to do, maybe more than anything else. So I've been like fooling around in CalTopo, mapping stuff out, and I have some ideas that I might try to explore this summer. But I would say, yeah, backpacking and more specifically high route style, I still think are my primary interests. I would definitely be down for another sort of mountaineering style trip, though, but I don't think I'm like necessarily focused on it.
Can you give us a teaser into where your high route could possibly be, or maybe the region? I don't know. It seems like the Sierras are particularly captivating for you.
Yeah, that's my favorite place.
Okay.
And it's not like I don't. They're not like better than other mountains, but it's a combination of factors. Like they're so vast, and the potential for off-trail travel is just so good. The quality of off-trail travel is so good relative to other mountain ranges. Like doing just a little bit of off-trail travel in the Cascades gave me a lot of perspective. It's so much slower and harder going because it's lower elevation. So to get between alpine areas is just brush. And if there's not like an established climber's trail or something, you know, it's bushwhacking. And I don't have the patience for that.
Sure. Sure.
And the Wind River Range is also excellent, but it's smaller and it's just as beautiful, I think, as the Sierra. But the Sierra is so vast, and the off-trail travel is so good that I just, you know, keep being drawn back there. In terms of the route that I'm thinking about, yeah, I would be in the Sierra. Sort of my, I guess, the parameters that I'm kind of looking at to design the route would be, I want it to have easy logistics. Like, I want you to be able to just, like, basically easy access trailhead, and then you can start walking right from it, and then ends in a similar way. So the two that really come to mind are some of the trailheads leaving right from Mammoth, immediately access some excellent areas of the Sierra, and then I wanted to end at Whitney, down in that area, because the Eastern Sierra is just way easier to access than the Western Sierra. Like trying to do the Kings Canyon High Basin route that we were trying last summer starts and ends in the Western Sierra, and it's just a lot harder to access. You know, you basically need a car. So I was thinking it'd be nice to design a route where like somebody without a car could, you know, easily go and do it. So like, say you could fly into Reno, take the bus to Mammoth, and then get off the bus and just start walking. So that was a key parameter there, because I'm always like annoyed at like how sounds stupid, but like at how hard like these routes can be to access. So I kind of just don't want to deal with it. Like I want to just be able to fly in, take a bus, and then start. So I wanted to start in Mammoth, and I wanted to end around Whitney, because then you can just like hitch into Lone Pine and then take the bus right back up to Reno. So those are sort of like the parameters. And other than that, basically I just would want to explore areas that are not already part of other routes.
That sounds really exciting. Dan, it was amazing having you on, and I know we're way over time, so thank you for being so generous with your time. I know we could continue to talk for hours. It was great to hear kind of about your evolution, really, from through hiking to high route to mountaineering, and then what you're kind of into and where you're exploring. I hope to have you on again, and thanks for coming on.
Yeah, Eric, thanks for having me. It's been a ton of fun. And if you want to see and hear more, check out my YouTube channel. It's just go to YouTube and my name, Dan Stenziano, and tons of videos of my adventures.
Linked below.
Linked below.